Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Scott Mandia. Scott is the Assistant Chair and Professor of Physical Science at Suffolk County Community College in New York, where he's been teaching for 29 years. Scott and I will talk about climate change, science misinformation, and he will share how to communicate with climate doubters. He introduces us to the Climate Science Rapid Response Team and Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, his two initiatives through which he is working to ensure proper research and climate communication without any negative influencers. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on today, Doug. Appreciate it.
All right. I love this stuff. I love talking about climate communication. You and I were just chatting about these things. I could talk about it all day. And so this will be exciting. But, let's just jump right into this. How concerned are Americans about climate change?
Okay, so every year a study comes out done by folks at George Mason and Yale, and they call it the Six Americas Report. And they survey people across the country, and they ask them a series of questions about, are you worried about climate change? Do you think climate change is caused by humans or whatnot? And the good news is, every year that comes out, more and more people are shifting toward being concerned and accepting about climate change. And it turns out that of the six groups, there are only two groups and it makes up 20%. What we call doubtful, which are people who maybe have an open window that they don't think it's serious and they don't think humans are causing it, but they're not in like hardcore denial. And then 10% hardcore denial, but you're just never going to get them to change their mind. But that leaves 80% of the population is either understanding humans are warming the planet and actually concerned about it. And about 70% of that 80, they pretty much accept the science and they have various degrees of concern. I would say that the top group, which is called alarm, that would be the group I would be in. Anyone who really understands what's currently happening and what the future could be like, they would be in that category. But an overwhelming majority of the country, and this is both liberals and conservatives, are either somewhat concerned about climate change or in fact alarmed, which is good because when people are concerned about something, they take action, and that's the key.
All right, so I want to come back to that because you look at the different breakdowns and the categories of that. Climate communicators, who are they really targeting? And I would argue that it's pretty just a sloppy approach. We're not necessarily even thinking about it in that way. Or should we target just this 20%? But I want to come back to that because I want to compare that. How does the scientific community feel about climate change?
Well, there have been numerous studies done where they've looked at peer-reviewed publications. What does the actual literature say as far as the cause and impact of climate change? And then there have been other studies where they've just asked the scientists, do you think humans are causing warming and how bad it's going to be? And the number you're going to see coming up all the time is 97%. So essentially, if you look at 100 papers or you ask 100 people who do this for a living, they're going to tell you humans are warming the planet and it's going to increase risks to multiple parts of both humans and nature. But if you ask the public is far below the 97%. So if I walk down the street and I ask somebody, hey, what percentage of experts think humans are warming the planet, it's a serious issue, a Democrat might say 70% of them might say, maybe 75%. So they're still not even close to 97. But those who are far more like sort of free market conservative type folks, they actually think the number is less than 50%. They think most scientists disagree. And there have been studies that show that once people understand that virtually every expert agrees humans are warming the planet, then they actually say, hey, maybe there's something to this. It's the old, I often say, if you're sitting on an airplane and you look out the window and there's 100 people furiously working, they look like mechanics, and the pilot comes on and she says, Those are 100 mechanics out there. 97% tell me there's no way this plane's going to make it. Two aren't sure, and one says, yeah, go ahead and fly. Are you going to still sit in that chair? No, you're going to get out of that plane.
I like to say, have a cocktail with a climate scientist if you really want. And, it
Yeah.
occurred to me, I was at an event where I was having a beer with Michael Mann and Gavin Schmidt. And
Hmm.
that'll scare you. You talk to those
Yeah.
guys with some alcohol and off the record, and that's how I feel like most Americans should hear about climate
Yeah.
change. I remember that fondly. Okay, so what are some of the main ways that I guess the public is being misinformed about climate change?
Well, I'd say historically it would be what you would call right-wing think tanks that are putting out publications that they're not peer-reviewed. In fact, in my climate change courses, I have students look at a book from an organization in Chicago called the Heartland Institute, and their book is glossy and has lots of colors and it has people with some titles under their name, and it says why scientists disagree, and it's filled with garbage basically. And then I give them the report from the National Academy of Sciences, which is the United States sort of supreme body of experts that Abraham Lincoln started, and also the Royal Society, which is Britain's national academy. And I have them compare the two. And it's amazing how when they're holding the Heartland book in their hand, without ever looking at anything or having taken any notes, I do it the first day of class, a lot of them think, hey, maybe there's some skepticism here. And by the end of the semester, they're actually angry at the Heartland Institute for basically lying in this book. I think groups like that are not as important as they used to be. I think the problem now is journalistic false balance and what I call journalistic no balance, meaning that as a journalist, you're taught. I mean, I'm not a journalism major, but I know whenever I've been interviewed, they always say, well, I'm going to get a quote from the other side. So, journalism, in order to appear objective, often you will ask somebody who has a different opinion. And unfortunately, if you have an article where you have two or three climate scientists saying humans are causing warming and there are some serious consequences, and then you get a scientist with a PhD who does no research in climate, but he's got a PhD or she from the Heartland Institute, and they put a quote in there saying, no, it's natural cycles. Well, then the public leaves thinking, see, they don't know, they disagree. It's kind of like, what's better for you, margarine or butter? Do you eat the yolk or egg whites only? It's kind of like, I don't know, I'm hearing two different things. And nowadays, and I constantly go after media on after I watch the news. You know, a good section of the West is burning. I mean, it's historic. People are dying right now. Homes are being destroyed. Lives are being forever damaged. Essentially, you can't the psychological damage. And I'm watching these reports about the fire, and nobody's making the connection to climate change. And there are very, very strong ties to climate change. So to me, that's also a problem because the public, it's kind of like reporting about a murder. The experts tell you we think it's this suspect, and the news just keeps talking about the murder. They never say, here's the suspect. So climate change needs to be mentioned more. And then, of course, social media. Everybody's in their echo chamber. And, what did Mark Twain say? That a lie can travel around the world before the truth gets its first pant leg on, or something like that. So
Good, he's got good stuff.
with social media now, it's everybody sees a meme or a YouTube video and suddenly, it must be the truth. So we're fighting an intentional and an unintentional propaganda machine, basically.
Well, where I think we've made some progress, and I don't know about local newspapers, but like the big newspapers, remember in the early aughts, it would be like, here's the climate scientist column, and here's this environmental economist from the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? And they gave them that. You don't really see that very often anymore in the major newspapers. They've stepped away. I'm talking about major newspapers. I don't know about local, but I think that's progress.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, the Los Angeles Times took some heat years ago when they actually put out a position saying that if you write a letter to the editor and the letter to the editor doubts human caused climate change, it won't be published. And of course, people screamed censorship and they said, no, that's settled science. If you want to post an article about you don't agree with Obama's plan for solving it, fine, it might make it. But it's kind of like saying, we're not going to publish a post that says smoking has no impact on lung cancer, or they're not going to accept something that says the earth is flat. So they basically said it's so well understood. I think Ralph Cicerone, the former president of the National Academy of Sciences, said the link between humans and climate change is as well understood as the fact that smoking increases your chances for lung cancer. I mean, it's very difficult to get scientists, that many, to agree. So when you get 97% of the scientists, I mean, I can go to any scientific conference that has geoscientists, and I'll tell somebody, I'll give you $100, pick out any 10 scientists in the room randomly, and I guarantee none of them will say it's not humans. And they won't take me on that bet.
Okay, what do you think about
You're
the
right.
research that you're doing? And as I was thinking about this episode, how do you really define if you've communicated climate change successfully to someone? You know, it's you're not we're not talking to each other, but like, okay, I'm trying to communicate something here. What would be a successful outcome?
Well, I've actually had a few people after I've had conversations with them say, wow, you're the first Democrat that's okay. You know, you're the first liberal I actually agree with. You're not like the other ones. And I think how you get successes, believe it or not, when you actually move away from the science, because most people who deny climate change science subconsciously are resisting the perceived solutions. So, for example, when you look at the social science research, it shows that people who identify themselves as Republican, their values are for smaller government, lower taxes, free markets, and to them, many of them subconsciously they think climate change is going to mean bigger government, businesses are going to get punished, taxes are going to go up, it's going to get more expensive because that's what they've been told by the propaganda machine. So they're really opposed to the potential solutions, not the science. But it's kind of like if I don't go to the doctor and the doctor doesn't tell me I'm sick, then I'm not sick. So it's kind of like you can't get to solutions if you deny there's a problem. So if I start talking with somebody who I know is skeptical, and we at some point in that conversation start talking about policy, what should we do to solve the problem? We have different ideas. I'm even open to nuclear power if it's done safely. Problem is, it's not cheap. It's too expensive. But once they understand that basically we have an energy problem and we have different ways to solve it, that's when you actually start making headway. And I think ultimately, if they see a climate scientist who says, "Yeah, I'll sit down and have a beer with you, and hey, I like sports too, and I've got a family, kids, and I'm willing to listen to you," I think that helps everybody because I think a lot of people, when they haven't met a scientist, have this false opinion about what they might be like. And all climate scientists are doing what they're doing because they're curious about how the world works. And in this particular example, they want to help. Just like people who go in the medical field, you might say, well, they're in it for the money. They want to help people. Sure, you can make good money on it, but anytime you've been sick and a doctor has helped you or a nurse has helped you, you can see they really care. So climate scientists are the same way. And I think it's important for people to see that.
You feel like maybe the climate change communication field, there's, I guess we're at the stage of diminishing returns. And I guess what I mean by that is, let's say you convince someone, like someone who is just sort of, yeah, I'm open minded, and they all of a sudden see this as this big issue. Do you feel a lot of these people that are sort of coming on board with climate change are actually terrible ambassadors to communicate climate change? If you know what I mean. Now
Yep,
they're out
yep.
there talking to other people, and in some ways, it seems like we're burning a lot of bridges because, and what I mean by diminishing returns, it's like, oh, there's a certain saturation, that echo chamber you talked about, but now all these people are out there are trying to communicate it, and I don't know how much success we're having that way.
Yeah, I think one of the issues, and it was always difficult for me because I was classically trained in the physical sciences, not sort of the economic side of the house. And the issue now is how do we solve the problem, and how do we do it sort of equitably, and how do we do it so that we don't get hit with a price tag up front. So I I like to start with energy savings, energy efficiency, and once people realize there's money to be made in that, then maybe they can take the next step forward. So one of the metaphors that I use is what I call it the LED light bulb. It's just about everybody has LED light bulbs now. And everybody understands that an LED light bulb costs more upfront than a traditional incandescent bulb. But everybody feels proud of themselves for buying one because they know that in the long run, it's going to save them much more money than it costs because it's going to last for maybe 20 years. It's going to use maybe 2 or 4 watts instead of 100. So they were willing to make an upfront investment in order to have long-term savings. And unfortunately, climate change has been the narrative for too many people is cost. I look at it as investment and opportunity. When you invest in a stock, you don't have that money anymore. You're hoping down the road when you cash it out, you're going to make money, but you spent money up front. So you've invested in the future. I have two retirement accounts. I'm investing in the future. So climate change is the same thing, where if we spend some money up front and start upgrading our grid and building some solar and wind farms and even nuclear, if we can find out a way to do it cheaper, then in the long run, it's going to be cheaper. And then we're not paying for these massive weather extremes that are just crushing us and other people around the world. So I think a lot of science communicators are not pitching it as an economic opportunity. And part of that's because that's not their training. So we really need more economists on board, but it's tough. It's tough to price. How do you price what's happening in the West right now with the fires? It's tough.
So I get the economic argument, and I think targeting toward policymakers, that's a very powerful one. But I have always thought about it too, is that if you give people sort of a choice that, oh, well, look, this is a positive direction you could go, but it's like a choice, given a choice, and not everyone's going to choose that. But I would sort of categorize climate change as something that we really need to address. There's really no sort of choice associated with it. It's something that big, and when you frame it as a choice, you're still going to have so many. It's sort of like recycling. You always max out at like 40, 50%. How do we kind of get it to that next level of urgency of don't give like, I get what you're saying with the economics of it, but the framing of a choice, inevitably huge chunks of people are going to be like, well, I choose not to pursue that. It doesn't make
Right,
sense to me.
right. So there's a couple of things. I was at a conference in San Francisco several years ago. It was a bright sunny day. The windows were open. All the lights were on above us. And after about 20 minutes of these scientists talking about this crisis run over, somebody raised their hand and said, "Look at us. We're sitting here. All the lights are on. We shouldn't have these lights on." And so I raised my hand and I said, "No, don't ever say that. What you need to say is, you can have all the lights on you want in the world if we're powering them differently. So I'm not telling you you can't drive a car. I'm not telling you you can't light your room or have a big TV. But if you're connected to a grid that isn't causing climate change, we're powering it from some other source, you can live the same way you want to live, right?" And that gets them on the right track. And I think that's kind of a useful narrative. But really, what it comes down to, and this is where I kind of joke, I tell my students I'm a free market liberal, which obviously it's sort of an oxymoron. But I always tell them that everybody likes a dollar. Democrats like a dollar, Republicans like a dollar. So if you can show people how they can make a dollar, you can show a company how it can make a dollar, then it's going to happen. So we look at the Amazon rainforest, say, look at them chopping trees down. Why are they doing that? Well, because they're going to make money. And I said, now imagine if somebody could make $2 to not chop the tree instead of a dollar to chop it. Well, then they would start not chopping trees. So I think we have to figure out a way for people and businesses to think there's a financial gain for my behavior. So I prefer carrot, not stick. Give them a performance benchmark, and if they hit it, they get some kind of financial gain. And I think that's. And there was one other example I thought was really interesting. These social scientists, they got an agreement from a Lowe's or Home Depot or something, and they put light bulbs on a shelf, and they had people walk in who they had taken surveys which identified them as liberal or conservative. Same exact light bulbs, but they packaged it differently. One light bulb said it's great for the environment, it's green, blah, blah, blah. And then in fine print, it showed how much it would save you per year. The other boxes, it was all about, look at the energy savings, look how much you can make. And that box says, by the way, it's very good for the environment. And wouldn't you know it, the people who are liberal went for the green packaging, the people who are conservative went for the money saving, but they all bought the exact same thing. Yeah.
All right, I have a question from the community room from Ken. Are university economics departments not prioritizing climate change research? Can you drill down more into why that's not happening? What the hell is more important these days?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not in the economics department. That's another problem. It's separate. So if you think about it, in my college, we have the physical sciences, then we have the social sciences, we have the humanities, all in totally different buildings, far apart. And so we're not really talking to each other as much as we probably should be. And a part of that too, I think, is that everybody has their sort of slang and lingo, jargon, I guess. And if I had to guess right now, I would say, given what's going on in the economy, probably many economists are thinking there's a more short-term thing we need to be talking about here than this long-term climate change thing. But virtually every risk manager, virtually every economist that's looked at this, in fact, something just came out today even that said that um, our economy is basically on shaky ground because of the systemic shocks from climate change, particularly these extreme events like hurricanes and fires and floods. Now you're seeing more and more insurance companies requiring businesses to have a climate solution in their portfolio. You're seeing investors now saying, how much exposure do we have to climate change? So I think economists are talking about it more than they used to. But our economy seems to work with what have we done for me lately? What is the market doing? It's quarterly reports,
Right.
and climate change is long-term investment. And so we're kind of hardwired politically because you get elected 2 years as a rep, 4 years as president, 6 years as a senator. Financially, it's, did we go up in the quarter? Did our company make money in the quarter? It's awfully difficult to make long-term planning a front burner issue when we're wired financially and politically to tell people the good news right away.
Okay, we're getting toward the end of the episode, and I have a few more questions from the community room, but
Sure.
I did want to ask you just a couple questions. And do you have some favorite climate communicators? And you could use any medium, writing or just speaking or whatever. Do you have some favorites you could share?
Yes, I highly recommend Catherine Hayhoe from Texas because first of all, she's a sweetheart. She's the nicest person in the world, and they come after her all the time, and she deals with them very politely. She also will come at it from a faith-based perspective, which I think is unique, as I think too many people think science and faith are mutually exclusive, and they're not. I think she's an excellent communicator. You mentioned Gavin Schmidt. Gavin Schmidt, who's the director of uh, NASA's GIS in New York. It's funny, his office is actually above the restaurant in Seinfeld, where Jerry Seinfeld
Oh,
used to.
really? Interesting.
Yeah, it's right above there. He's an ex-communicator for essentially the science. Um, I think there's some good reporters out there. Um, Eric Roston, I think, is very good. Schwartz is very good. Um, Borenstein is very good. I'm trying to think of some other. There's some new young um, climate communicators out there that I think are also very good. But if you want a good list, if you go to Catherine Hale's website, she has a list of climate scientists. And then there's a gentleman named Robert Rhodes who does a lot of stuff with modeling. He has a list of who are the 100 top Twitter people that the top 100 climate scientists follow.
Hmm.
So that's sort of like, who are the who's who following. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a neat list too.
All right, and I did want to get in. I want to talk about the two groups that you founded. If you could just kind of briefly tell us what
Yeah.
those groups do and
Yeah.
purpose.
So in 2010, I co-founded a group with two other gentlemen, Dr. John Abraham and Ray Wayman from California. And it's called the Climate Science Rapid Response Team. And we decided that we didn't think politicians and journalists were able to get the correct information rapidly. So we basically became like a match.com where if you had a question, if you were an elected official or a journalist, we would match you up with a scientist and literally within hours you could get a result. And then in 2012, after I saw more and more climate scientists sort of coming under fire legally and people trying to subpoena emails to make them look bad, I co-founded with Joshua Wolf, the Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, which is now a 501c3. It's a federal nonprofit you could donate to. And we have a executive director who's an attorney, and we have people on the board who've argued dozens of cases at the United States Supreme Court level. And tomorrow we're putting out a new document for scientists to basically how can you be active and protect yourself legally, what to say, not to say, that kind of thing. So I'll be
Awesome.
tweeting that tomorrow.
Great. And we'll have links to that on the wall. We have a wall, like an episode wall for this, and we'll put that all there. I want to take you into just chatting. We have a few more questions, guys, in the community room. I'll get to your questions, but I just want to close out the episode. Scott would love to have you on again. Maybe there's a particular area that we could drill into, but we're using Simpatico to have these conversations, and
Sure,
would love a regular conversation with you. That'd be fantastic.
absolutely.
All right, so hold on. We'll be right back to just chatting. Okay, just a quick stop. We just like to kind of start and stop the episode. Let me get to, there was a couple more questions I want to get to. Sakib asks, what's your opinion on the climate denialists' right to free speech?
Well, everybody has a right to an opinion, even a wrong one. There's a difference between just being wrong about something and then basically, I always say, if you're wrong about it the first time, it's ignorance. But once it's been pointed out that what you're saying is absolutely not true and you keep perpetuating, then it's malice. So, um, I mean, again, it's a small percentage, but when you have something that is well understood as humans causing global warming, I don't understand a person having a position of denial on the science. I know psychologically why they do, but you do have uh, free speech rights to say something foolish. Unfortunately, we've all done that.
In your example of like a newspaper is not obligated to print, that doesn't infringe on your freedom of speech. If they decide not to print it, you're allowed to go to the street corner and put up a poster, or you're allowed to start your own newspaper. And so, yeah, it's
Yeah,
so I
I mean, there are limitations, right? You can't get on an airplane and yell bomb,
right.
that kind of thing. So a newspaper is they get thousands of letters together and they print a handful. So they're already essentially censoring a majority of the letters anyway. So if they're telling you up front, don't waste your time, we're not going to look at it, that's go to somewhere else then.
All right, here's one from Mike. I appreciate all the points you're making. What do you think when someone says, quote, but the earth has been this warm before. Why do we need to change anything?
Yeah. So what that comes down to is when I approach this in my classes, I approach it like a crime drama. It's like, okay, so the dead body is the warming planet. So we know we've got a warming planet. There's no question about that, right? And we have all the evidence that shows the planet's warming in a variety of ways. And they say, okay, we're going to line up all the suspects, right? So the suspects generally are something called plate tectonics, where we have volcanoes and mountain building, and those things take millions of years, and it's caused climate change over literally millions and millions of years. That clearly is not something that humans need to worry about because we're on a 100-year time scale. Then we look at these things called Milankovitch cycles, which have to do with the Earth's tilt wobbles a little bit, the shape of the orbit around the sun varies a little bit, and then we kind of wobble around like a top, which kind of changes what season we are in, let's say, the month of January. Those things operate on 20, 40, and 100,000 year cycles. Those definitely change climate, but again, they're doing it over extremely slow timescales. So when you actually start looking at all of the things that can cause climate change, the only one that can explain the short-term rapid rise in temperatures, along with what I call the pattern of warming, right? It's getting warmer faster at the poles and the tropics. It's warming faster at night than during the day. Winter's warming faster than summer. All of those things show us that it's not more energy coming into the planet. The planet's just not able to release that energy back to space, right? It's like a bank account. You've got deposits and withdrawals. So if we know that the balance is increasing, you got more heat, it's either because there's more deposits, which only can come from the sun, and we're measuring the sun, it's really unchanged. So then it must mean there's less heat escaping. And then you look at the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's the highest it's been in 3 million years. And we know CO2 traps heat. And so it actually, not only does it, the observations match heat trapping, the physics tells us that it's heat trapping. There's really nothing else that can explain it. And if somebody is convinced it isn't CO2, then it's something we don't know about that's never happened before that is somehow able to mask the heating that we know CO2 must cause. So you can either go with what we know or two unknowns, which is kind of, you got to go with what we know.
You know, the cynic in me, it's just using science is one of the main arguments. I mean, for some people are just they're truly they want to know more about the science, but like for a lot of people, just digging into the science is is that really going to make a difference? And that's a depressing thought that you can't talk about facts and reality, but that you have to sort of think what's the like their motivation for even asking that question. There's all sorts of things going on independent of the actual sort of factual response. And then sort of in real time, are you able to kind of, all right, I know what they're trying to do here, and is it going to be about an argument? Is it trying to make a point? And so there's a lot of sort of really quick decisions you have to make and like how you're going to kind of respond to that. Do they really want to hear what you just described? Obviously that made sense to me, but do they
Yeah.
actually want to hear that?
Yeah, believe it or not, when I've had that discussion, because natural cycles is still the number one thing I hear. Well, how do you know it's not natural cycles? And I quickly go over that. They're like, oh, okay, because I think when they understand that all of the things that have caused climate change in the past operate on really, really slow cycles, then it kind of makes sense to them because it's if you didn't dig deeper and you just hear, oh, natural cycles, oh, it's been warmer before, oh, it's been colder before, then you don't know. But when someone explains to you that those things took thousands and millions of years, and we're seeing massive increases in decades to a century, then they realize it's something different. And then, of course, that's why that hockey stick plot became controversial for some people, because it was crystal clear that in that plot, at least in the last 2,000 years, something unprecedented happened in the last few decades. And then when you look at these hockey stick plots that go back 10, 20,000 years, it's crystal clear that whatever's happening now never happened in the last 20,000 years. So it really kind of puts that sort of natural argument to rest. But most people don't know that.
Do you ever find yourself advising people that have actually done a lot of climate communication? And I guess, think about social media. I subscribe to a few people, and it's like maybe 2 dozen tweets a day of like, the earth is ending. This is hell on earth, and just that all day long. Do you actually talk to these people and try to give them some advice? I'm assuming that you don't necessarily think that's the most effective
No.
strategy.
Um, Back in 2014, I actually was one of Al Gore's science advisors for his Dog and Pony show, the slideshow, when he had Climate Reality in San Francisco.
Nice.
So I got to meet him. I sat with Bette Midler, and she was so upset about climate change that she started crying. I actually gave her a hug. And so I always tell people the most famous person I've hugged is Bette Midler because of climate change.
Nice.
But I do tell people that doom and gloom doesn't motivate people. I think for me, again, even though I tend to be more progressive in my politics, I try to always use the financial factor. Say, hey, wouldn't you like your electric bill to be half? Who wouldn't? Wouldn't you like your car to get 50 miles per gallon and not cost any more? Right? And so I think when you start going like that, people, wouldn't you like your insurance to be less? Wouldn't you like your taxes to be less? Every time we have these natural disasters, a lot of times my students, because they're younger, they don't get it. It's like, well, if the federal government is sending billions and billions of dollars to clean up these natural disasters, if they don't raise your taxes, where's it coming from? And they figure out, oh, they're going to borrow from me. Oh, maybe the student loan program, right? Or something that's near and dear to them. I said, so we have a budget, and climate change is starting to chew a bigger slice of the budget. So one of the best ways I think to explain this is that, particularly to conservatives, is they want a smaller government. Like, the longer we take to take action, the more likely we're going to have to take a big action. And big action is going to mean government's going to make a decision for us. If we start allowing businesses, if we give incentives, government incentives for businesses to start transitioning to energy, then free markets can get us out of this mess. So I'm a firm believer in that free markets will get us out of this mess, but not if they stay in denial. And that's the key, because otherwise, then you're going to get like an Obamacare for climate. And you saw, what happened with that. Whether you like that or not, it's politically a lightning rod. So give incentives to companies to start coming up with ways for us to save energy.
Well, and looking back historically, maybe you can correct me. I think you're probably, and I don't know how old you are, but I think targeting climate communications to just very specific people, maybe that's going to have. It's a lot of people think, well, we got to tell everybody, we got to tell the general public. And I think about the Montreal Protocol and the chloroform. The public had a general awareness, but
Right.
no, leaders came together very quickly. That was really fast,
Yep.
and that they led and they made the Montreal Protocol, and it happened very quickly. And they didn't allow the sort of everything to kind of undermine it. And you target those higher level people, and I'm sure those science advisors came in at the highest level and sort of said this is a big deal. And why? I mean, I guess we're trying to do that now, but like it wasn't about like getting the public behind it. It was like, no, we need to do this faster.
Yeah, and we did the same thing with acid rain.
Yeah.
We solved that. So, and both those examples early on, we had some of the same deniers that Naomi Oreskes writes about in The Merchants of Doubt, doubting the ozone hole. First, there is none, then it's natural, then there's nothing we can do about it, it's too expensive. Same arguments with climate, same thing with acid rain. But you know what made them do it? First of all, we had leaders who worked together internationally, but they found an inexpensive solution in both cases. And in fact, with acid rain, they had a cap and trade. And remember, cap and trade was a John McCain, that was a Republican idea. Um, so with climate change, because fossil fuels are driving everybody's economy, it's a bit of a bigger nut to crack. Um, and people put gas in the car every day and they see the sign every corner has a gasoline price on it. So when that starts moving, man, people know. I'll ask my students, what's the price of gas? Boom, they know, right? So with chlorofluorocarbons, it was kind of this background kind of thing, and so people didn't feel as affected by it until maybe they had to switch their AC in their car air conditioning or something. But in
Protocol
order
came so
to,
quickly.
yeah, yeah. So, and it was like anything, there were a lot of iterations to the Montreal Protocol. They didn't get it right the first time, but that's what you do with policy. I think sometimes people on the political left, they make the perfect the enemy of the good, right? So they, or did I say that backwards? Whatever. They want a perfect bill, and like something like the Green New Deal was never going to be able to pass, both sides. And it was just sort of an idea, but um, I think the best way to approach this is to come up with some sort of plan that is really not going to get us where we need to go, but it's something that maybe we can get some votes on the Republican side and then build on that.
Foot in the door kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, this is a wonderful conversation. This episode should be available to you tomorrow, and hopefully we can get, share on your social media, put it on a website. We'd love that,
Absolutely.
and upload to YouTube, and definitely just extend an invitation to come back. Maybe there's a very focused area that we can have that conversation, but that's what
Sure.
Simpatico is all about.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back in. I enjoyed speaking with you today.
All right, well, I'm going to let you go. You can just check out a Zoom, but thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Good luck with your next one.
All right,
Bye
bye.
bye.